I was in Nashville for 4 days in late September, sent there by my company to shadow a regional training conference. I'd been to Nashville once before, years ago, but I didn't know it well. I was staying at a Hampton Inn off Broadway, eating room service the first night because I was tired and didn't feel like navigating a new city alone. The second night, I forced myself out. There's a particular loneliness to traveling solo for work. You're surrounded by people all day in conference rooms, but the evenings drop out from under you. I found a honky-tonk about a block away from the hotel, ordered a beer at the bar, and that's where I met Ryan. He had one of those easy, immediate energies. He introduced himself before I even fully sat down, asked what brought me into town, laughed at the right moments. He was there for work too, he said. Software sales, convention at Opryland Hotel. We talked for 2, maybe 3 hours. Sports, jobs, hometowns, normal stuff. At the end of the night, he suggested we grab dinner the following evening since we were both flying out Friday morning. I said sure. I remembered thinking on the walk back to my hotel, good hang. That was it. Nothing more than that. The next morning, I was grabbing coffee in the hotel lobby before the first session when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around and there was Ryan, overnight bag slung over one shoulder, grinning at me. No way, I said. You're here. He said his hotel had screwed up his reservation, something about double booking, and he had to find somewhere last minute. The Hampton had availability. Wasn't that something? It was something, I agreed. I didn't think much of it at the time. Nashville was packed that week. These things happen. He checked in while I grabbed my coffee, and we rode the elevator together. Discovered we were both on the same floor, room 614 and 618, and laughed about the coincidence. I went to my conference, he went to his. Dinner that night was genuinely fun. We went to a steakhouse he looked up, drank too much bourbon, split a dessert we didn't need. He had a gift for storytelling, self-deprecating, good timing. The kind of guy who made you feel like you'd known him for years. I remember at one point thinking I should introduce him to my friend group back home. He'd fit right in. Walking back, he asked if I wanted to get a nightcap at a hotel bar. I said I was beat, needed to be up by 6 to catch my flight. He was understanding, totally fine, totally normal. I went upstairs, showered, set my alarm, and was asleep by 11. I woke up at 2:47 a.m. and I didn't know why. That disorientation of a hotel room, the unfamiliar ceiling, the aggressive air conditioning, the 2 white curtains. I lay still for a moment, coming back to myself. Then I heard it. Breathing. Not loud, not dramatic, just slow, measured breathing from somewhere in the room that was not me. I have never moved so carefully in my life. I tilted my head 1 degree at a time toward the chair in the corner, the one near the window where I'd thrown my jacket. And in the dark, I could make out a shape, a person, sitting in the chair, perfectly still. I didn't scream. I don't know why. I think my body short-circuited past panic into something colder. Ryan. My voice came out strange, flat. A pause. Hey. His voice was calm, conversational, like we were still at dinner. Sorry. Couldn't sleep. I sat up slowly and turned on the bedside lamp. He was fully dressed, sitting with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. He looked up at me and smiled. That same easy smile. How did you get in here? I said. It wasn't a question so much as a sentence I needed to say out loud to confirm reality. He said the door must not have been latched completely. He said he knocked, but I was asleep. He said he just needed some company, that he sometimes got bad anxiety in hotel rooms. He said it like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. I told him to leave. He didn't move for a long moment. He just looked at me with that smile sitting on his face, like it was painted there. Then he stood up, slowly, and said, yeah, okay, sorry man. He walked to the door, pulled it open, and looked back at me once before stepping into the hallway. I got up and threw the deadbolt and the chain. I sat at the edge of the bed and stared at the door for probably 20 minutes. I called the front desk. They sent security up. They knocked on 618, got no answer. They told me the room had been checked in under Kevin Dulworth. No Ryan anything. When they pulled up the name I'd given them, Ryan, software sales, Upperland Conference, there was no record of any affiliated guest by that description. Security walked me through the camera footage from the hallway outside my room. At 2:31 a.m., a figure approached my door and stood in front of it for 11 seconds. Then the door opened and the figure went inside. The door had latched. I know I had it latched. I remember checking it. What I kept coming back to isn't the chair. It isn't the smile or the lie about the door or the fake name. It's the breathing. He wasn't breathing like someone who couldn't sleep, who was anxious, who had wandered somewhere on impulse. He was breathing the way you breathe when you've been sitting somewhere for a long time and you've gotten completely comfortable, patient, slow, settled. He'd been in that room for a while before I woke up, long enough to regulate. I don't know what he was waiting for me to do. I don't know what he wanted. I've replayed every conversation from those 2 days, sifted through every detail, and the terrifying answer is that he seemed completely normal right up until he didn't. There was no tell. Nothing that made me think twice. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Not Ryan in the chair. The fact I would have never seen it coming. I've gone back and forth about posting this. It's been about 8 months and I still can't explain what we saw. And I'm starting to think I never will. My name's Noah. I'm 23. I live in coastal Georgia, and I grew up about 40 minutes outside of Savannah in a small town that sits along the edge of a tidal marsh. My whole life, people have said that stretch of water is haunted. But the way old people say it, kinda casually, the way you'd say a road has bad luck, you grew up hearing it enough and it stops meaning anything. At least it did for me. It doesn't anymore. Last October, my older brother Nate and his girlfriend Sophia came down to visit for a long weekend. Nate moved to Atlanta for work 3 years ago and doesn't get back much. Sophia had never been to that part of Georgia at all. She kept saying she wanted to see the real South, the quiet parts, not just Savannah's tourist squares and horse-drawn carriages. So on the second night, the three of us drove out to the Marsh Road. There's a pull-off spot about 2 miles past the highway where locals sometimes go to fish at night. It overlooks a wide section of the inlet, and on a clear night, you can see the gas burn off from a refinery about 6 miles across the water. This steady orange glow that floats above the tree line. It sounds ugly, but it's actually kind of beautiful. The water reflects it. We used to come out here as teenagers, just to sit on the tailgate and feel like we were somewhere important. We got there around 10. The air was thick and cool the way October nights get down here. Not cold enough for a jacket, but heavy enough that you could feel it in your lungs. We sat on the hood of Nate's truck and I pointed at the orange glow across the water. Sophia loved it. She started taking pictures. We talked for maybe 30 minutes about nothing in particular, family stuff, their apartment in Atlanta, whether Nate was going to propose. That's when Sophia said, "There's someone on the dock." There's an old wooden dock that juts out about 20 feet into the water. Nobody owns it officially. Half the planks are rotten. We used to dare each other to walk out to the end when we were kids. I looked out when Sophia was pointing and I didn't see anything at first. The dock was dark, no lights, just black shapes against the dull reflection of the water. Then I saw it. A person, standing at the very end of the dock, completely still. My first thought was fishermen. That's a reasonable thing. People fish at night, but they weren't holding a rod, and they weren't sitting on the edge. They were just standing, arms at their sides, facing the water, dressed in something dark. We couldn't tell anything from that distance, maybe 40 yards. Nate said I can't tell if it's a man or a woman. Sophia said she thought it was a woman because of the hair, long, hanging straight down. Neither of them seemed that bothered. I was the only one who felt something sink in their chest. I kept watching, and the more I watched, the more wrong it felt. The person didn't move at all. Not to shift their weight, not to raise a hand. Nothing. I've watched plenty of people staring out at water. Everyone moves. You scratch your nose. You roll your shoulders. You adjust. This person was absolutely, perfectly still, like they'd been placed there. We stayed for another 20 minutes. The figure didn't move once. Nate eventually said we should head back. He was only half paying attention by then, scrolling his phone. Sophia had moved to talking about dinner, but I was staring at the dock, and right before Nate reached for his keys, I saw the figure turn its head, not toward us, not toward the water. It turned and looked back over its shoulder, down the dock, toward land, toward the pull-off where we were parked. That's when I saw something I still can't explain cleanly. The profile was clear against the glow of the water, and I'm almost completely certain the head was turned too far. Not dramatically, not movie monster far, just past where a head should stop. A few degrees past natural, like a dial turned slightly beyond its range. Then it stopped off the dock, not into the water, toward us. It moved off the dock onto the bank in one motion and just started walking. Fast. Not running yet, but fast. With that same wrong stillness in the upper body. Arms not swinging. Head locked in one direction. The legs were moving, but everything above the waist was rigid. It covered the distance between the dock and the tree line in seconds, and that's when Sophia made a sound I'd never heard from her before. Not a scream, something lower. Like the sound left her before she decided to make it. Nate, I said. Just his name, nothing else. He looked up from his phone, and I saw it coming out of the trees at the edge of the pull-off, and that's when it broke into a full run. And I want to be careful about how I describe this because I know how it sounds. But the run was not right. It was fast, faster than it should have been for how it moved. But the arms still weren't pumping. They stayed at its sides, slightly behind the body. And the head didn't bounce the way a head does when a person runs. It stayed level, fixed on us the whole time. Nate had the truck running before it even grabbed the door handle. Sophia was already inside. I got in and he floored it onto the road before my door was fully shut. And I grabbed the handle and pulled it closed and looked in the side mirror, and it was still coming. Still running. Still that same locked, rigid posture, closing ground at the edge of the headlights. And then the road curved, and it was gone. Nobody talked for the first few minutes. Then Sophia said something so quiet, I almost didn't hear it. She said, "It didn't make any sound, but it was running, on the gravel. Did you notice that? It didn't make any sound." I had noticed. I just didn't let myself think about it yet. Nate said it was a person. Someone messed up. Someone trying to scare people. He said it the way you say something you need to be true. I didn't say anything, because I'd been watching that figure from the moment Sophia spotted it. And I kept coming back to one thing I still can't shake. The 40 yards between the end of the dock and the tree line. 40 yards of open bank, mud and marsh grass. We would have heard footsteps. We would have heard something crashing through. There was nothing, just silence. And then it was already at the tree line, already moving toward us like it had already been there. Like the distance had just folded. The drive home was quiet. We ate leftovers, watched something on Netflix, and went to bed. I don't think any of us slept much. 2 weeks later, I mentioned the dock to my mom. Casually, the way you'd mention any story. She got quiet and said, "You went out there at night?" I said, "Yeah, just to show Sophia the view." She didn't say anything for a second. Then she said, "Mrs. Fontenot's daughter went missing from that dock 15 years ago, October. They never found her. They just found her shoes at the end. I didn't know that. I grew up here and I never knew that." I asked her what the daughter looked like. She pulled out her phone and scrolled for a while, then showed me an old photo from a Facebook memorial page. A girl, maybe 19 or 20, long dark hair, straight down. I haven't been back to that road. I don't drive that stretch at night anymore. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed and the house is quiet enough, I think I can hear the marsh. That low, wet sound it makes when the tide shifts. And every time, I have to stop myself from wondering whether something is standing there at the edge of it, still, arms at its sides, waiting to be looked at. My buddy Kyle and I had been running a small cabin on Lake Allatoona for a week. Nothing fancy. A wood-paneled box with a screen porch and a beat-up aluminum fishing boat that came with the property. It was exactly what we wanted. No cell service worth mentioning. No neighbors close enough to bother us. We were both 24, burned out from our respective jobs, and desperately needed nothing to do for 7 days. The first 4 days were perfect. We'd fish in the mornings, drink cold beer on the dock in the afternoons, and play cards on the porch after dark. The lake had maybe a dozen cabins scattered around its edges, but we rarely saw anyone. Just the occasional ski boat cutting across the water in the middle of the day, and then quiet. On the 5th night, we noticed the cabin across the lake had its lights on. This sounded like nothing. It was nothing at first. We'd seen it lit up a couple nights before and assumed it was just another rental. But that night, Kyle mentioned he'd been watching it and thought he'd seen someone standing on their dock earlier. Just standing there, looking out at the water. He pointed it out, not alarmed. Just observational. The way you talk about things when you're a few beers deep and there's nothing else going on. I looked, but by then the dock was empty. The lights in the cabin were on, but nothing was moving that I could see. We forgot about it and went to bed. The next day, Kyle wanted to fish the northern end of the lake, which happened to take us closer to that cabin. I noticed in the daylight it looked different from ours, older, the wood dark and weathered. No car in the gravel lot beside it. A rowboat was pulled up on shore. The dock had a couple of cheap plastic lawn chairs on it, and someone was sitting in one of them as we motored past. I raised my hand in a wave, the way you do with strangers on water, just reflexive, pointless. The person didn't wave back, just watched us go by. I couldn't make out a face at that distance, just a figure in a chair, still as furniture. Friendly, Kyle said, and we laughed it off. That night I couldn't sleep. Sometime around 2 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom and glanced out the window toward the lake, without really thinking about it. The water was flat and dark, and there was just enough moonlight to see the opposite shore. There were 2 people standing on the other cabin's dock, not sitting in chairs, standing, side by side, facing our direction. I told myself it was normal. People have insomnia. People stand on their docks at night. I watched for maybe 30 seconds, convinced myself I was being an idiot, and went back to bed. The next morning I told Kyle, and he got quiet in a way that told me he'd been chewing on something too. Turns out he'd woken up around the same time and looked out and seen the same thing, except he'd seen it 20 minutes earlier than I had, which means they'd been standing there for at least that long. We decided without saying it directly to stay off that end of the lake. The day passed fine. We fished, we ate, we tried not to talk about it. But that evening, as the sun was going down, and we were sitting on our dock, Kyle grabbed my arm. The rowboat from across the lake was in the water. It was moving. Not fast, not with urgency, just slowly, steadily, oars dipping in a quiet rhythm. 2 people in it, coming in our direction. My first instinct, and I'm still a little ashamed of this, was still to rationalize. Maybe they were just out on an evening row. Maybe they just wanted to introduce themselves. Kyle, though, was already standing up, and I recognized the look on his face because I'd felt it that morning staring out the window. Something was wrong and his body knew it before his brain caught up. The rowboat was maybe 200 yards out when it stopped. No particular reason. It just stopped, and the 2 people in it sat there, facing us. We stood on our dock, and they sat in their boat, and nobody moved for what felt like a very long time. Then one of them raised their hand, slow, not a wave exactly, more like an acknowledgement, the deliberate way you'd point something out to someone standing next to you. Kyle said very quietly, "We need to go inside right now." We went inside. I locked the door, which felt absurd. Kyle pulled the curtain across the front window, and then we sat at the kitchen table and didn't say anything for a while. After about 10 minutes, I looked through the curtain. The rowboat was gone. The lake was empty and still. We should have packed up and left that night. Instead, we convinced each other that we were being ridiculous, that two people had rowed across the lake and waved at us, and we turned it into a horror movie in our heads. We laughed about it, nervously, too loudly, but we laughed. I was almost asleep when I heard it. A sound from the porch. Not a big sound, just the soft, specific creak of weight settling onto old wood. The kind of sound the porch made when you stepped onto it from the steps. I lay completely still. My heart was doing something terrible in my chest. The creak came again. Slow, deliberate, moving toward the front door. Then it stopped. I don't know how long I lay there after that. Long enough that my body started to convince me I imagined it, that it was an animal, that old wood settles and makes sounds for no reason. I never got up to check. I've thought about that a lot since. That I just lay there with my eyes open in the dark, listening to absolutely nothing, and didn't move until sunrise. In the morning, Kyle found the two plastic chairs from across the lake sitting on our porch, side by side, facing the front door. We were packed and on the road within 20 minutes. We haven't really talked about it since. I don't have an explanation for what those people wanted. I don't know how they got onto our porch without us hearing the door, or why they left those chairs, or whether they were watching us the whole week. What I keep coming back to is the moment in the rowboat, one of them raising their hand, because it didn't feel like a greeting. It felt like they were showing us something, like they were saying, "We see you in there," like they wanted us to understand, before anything else, that they had been watching us for a very long time.